I didn't know the city had a sound until I started working nights. A low droning made of buses, distant trains, and the soft hiss of heat bleeding from old brick. Chicago sings under its breath, even when it's trying to sleep. Back then, 81 into 82, the song had a wrong note in it. You could feel it in the way people looked over their shoulders, the way the headlines kept repeating the same words. Woman, missing, found. I wasn't special, just another detective with bad coffee and a kid who liked to fall asleep on my shoulder when I'd get home at dawn. I carried a notebook because it made me feel like I could hold the chaos still long enough to read it. Most nights, I wrote times and addresses. On the worst nights, I wrote names. We called them the pattern. You'd pick up on it after you'd stared long enough at pushpins stuck into precinct maps. The victims were different: age, race, job. But there was repetition where there shouldn't have been any. The way the bodies were found, the edges of ritual, without the courage to speak the word. Reporters said copycat. The brass said coincidence. The street said nothing. It just walked faster after dark. Two things stayed with me from the first scene I caught: the smell of rain soaking through a paper bag in the alley, and the noise my partner, Franco, made when he saw what was inside. Not a scream, not even a word, just the sound a man makes when the world rearranges itself into something he can't live in. We said very little and did very much. We canvassed. We asked bar owners and cabbies and insomniacs with windows over alleys what they'd seen. Mostly, they saw fog and headlights, and their own fear reflected in wet asphalt. Tips came in waves, and then died out. The handful we kept circled a name: Gecht. The kind of name that rattled around lockers without anyone writing it down. A boss who liked to be liked. A grin too wide. An old connection to a killer everyone knew by then. As if darkness rubbed off like grease on a man's hands and never washed away. It wasn't proof. It was a temperature reading. You don't catch people like that by waiting. You catch them by getting small. We watched a storefront, massage by neon, until our bones ached from sitting. Franco developed a habit of cursing at the same minute every night. I developed a habit of counting the steps of a man who came and went like a metronome. 14 in, 14 out. The 14th night, he held the door open for someone else. The someone else was a kid. A face I'd seen once on the late news, back when he was a victim of something else. Unemployment, boredom, the city eating its own sons. The kid's name was Eddie. He smoked like it was part of his job. When we brought him in, he didn't look like a murderer. He looked like a person who'd only ever done what he was told, and what he'd been told had gotten worse every year. The first thing he asked for was a glass of water. The second thing he asked for was permission to use the bathroom. He said, "Sir," to men half his height. I didn't play the good cop. I played the tired one. I told him the truth, that the city was a machine that liked to chew people up, and that if he didn't talk, it'd grind him into paste and feed him to the next one. I told him the names of 3 women whose mothers called every morning. I told him I had a son, and that if someone hurt him, I would become something I didn't recognize. Eddie looked at my hands when I said that. He started to talk. He talked about Robin first, because they all did. The one with the voice that made your spine obey. A man who said he could prove the world was made of more than bricks and glass, that there were currents beneath the city, like wind under doors, and he could make them move. Robin told them the pain was a key. He told them women had a lock in them that opened to power. He told them that every city has temples. Ours just didn't look like churches. Ours looked like cheap rooms with papered windows and a sink that never ran clean. Why did you do it? I asked. Because that's the question that matters, even when the answer doesn't help. He said the thing I'd been afraid to hear. Because it worked. I didn't understand him then. I thought he meant the crimes worked, the way a plan works. What he meant took me months to see. We raided first, because once the words start spilling, you don't wait. You go. The apartment was smaller than the rumors made it. The air had a learned stink. Incense trying to outrun something, it couldn't. Books on a milk crate, taped clippings, a shrine that wanted to be a joke, but wasn't. Photographs. Always photographs. Not the kind you carry in your wallet, the kind you bury in a wall and never say aloud. Evidence piles like snow. It looks clean, like purity, but if you've stood in it long enough, you know it's just frozen filth, waiting to melt. In the middle of it was a box lined with red cloth that had seen too much. Inside, there were things that meant nothing to anyone who didn't belong there. A scrap of ribbon, a subway token, a matchbook from a bar I knew had closed 3 years prior. Meaning stitched to meaning in the way only madmen and believers can do. We took them all. The leader, the brothers, the boy with the quiet voice, and in the rooms where fluorescent lights make everyone look like a suspect, we learned their grammar. They didn't call it a cult. They didn't call it a club. They said family, but not as comfort, more like a shared sentence. The words they repeated had that oily sheen of something borrowed from somewhere darker and older. Transgression, will, assent. One of them, the older brother, kept his eyes on the ceiling while he told me that he'd never wanted to be special. Not until someone told him special meant chosen. Trials are theater. The city came to watch itself endure. People filed in with curiosity and filed out with nausea. The four men became a single silhouette to the public. The Chicago Ripper crew. I didn't say the name. Names like that feed themselves when you speak them. We handed over our files and our photos. We handed over the logic of the map we'd drawn. The jury did what juries do. Justice is heavy and slow, and wears out its own shoes. I slept better for 3 nights. On the 4th, a letter slid under my front door. No stamp, no return address. My name written in an unsteady hand that didn't like its own letters. Inside, a single page typed on a machine that needed a new ribbon. You've closed one door. The house has many. I didn't show my wife. I didn't tell my partner. I folded it back into the envelope and put it in the freezer under a bag of peas, because the idea of it being warm made my skin itch. The next morning, I walked to the precinct and found the day desk buried under messages. 2 were from a woman on the south side who said her sister hadn't come home. 2 more from a journalist who sounded overeager and underpaid, and 1 from a retired detective named Abrams who wanted to meet me where it all started. I didn't know where that was, so I asked. He said, the alley behind the deli on Milwaukee, where the bag tore. I hadn't put that detail in my report. No one had. He heard it from a cop, who heard it from a coroner, who drank with a man who used to ride my partner's beat. Chicago is a river. Everything eventually floats downstream. Abrams had a face like a closed case file, creased with a coffee ring and someone's thumbprint in the corner. He wore a suit too big for him and a tie too old for anyone. He didn't waste time on courtesy. You think you got them, he said. And you did. Those 4. But you didn't get what they were carrying. I told him I didn't have the energy for wisdom. He ignored me. Cities got these pockets of belief, he said. Not churches, not synagogues. Little circles that think they've found a shortcut to power. Men like your Gecht. He didn't invent anything. He passed it along, like a lit match when you don't want to be the one holding it. He handed me a folder. Inside, photocopies of pamphlets, cuttings from newsletters printed on the cheap, paragraphs of philosophy that read like threats with punctuation. The names were different. The words were the same. Do the unthinkable. To unmake the wall between you and what you want. Most of them are smoke, Abrams said. Cranks. But every once in a while, someone believes hard enough to hurt people. That's when they find each other. They call it a current. He tapped the folder. It runs under the streets. You turned out one valve. Another's still open. I asked him why me? Why now? He looked at me the way old men look at their old houses. Like they love them enough to admit the rot. Because once you hear the note, he said, you can't stop hearing it. I didn't want to be recruited into a ghost hunt. I wanted to take my kid to the zoo and point at animals and pretend the world was only what you could name. Instead, I started to pay attention to the city's strange. I walked past a basement window on Wabash, where candles burned at noon. I wrote down the name of a bookshop that never had customers, but always had the open sign lit. I stood outside the locked door meeting rooms on the second floor of old union buildings and listened to hands being shaken over ideas that sounded like favors with teeth. The journalist who'd left messages, her name was Myra, finally got me to call her back by leaving a fact I hadn't told anyone on my machine. The red cloth wasn't velvet. It was cotton dyed in a sink. I asked her how she knew. She told me we'd both been given the same folder. Abrams liked to share his paranoia evenly. We met in the kind of diner where the coffee is a color, not a flavor. She talked like a person who slept with her tape recorder under her pillow. I told her what I could without getting her killed by filing a story. She told me she'd tracked one of the pamphlets to a P.O. box rented by a man who'd never existed before 1979. She showed me a photo, a man leaving a building with a sign that said storage on it. The man's face blurred with motion or with the camera's shyness. You think it's the same as the Ripper crew? She asked. I think it's the water they swam in, I said. We watched the storage unit together. That's a sentence that sounds like boredom. It was. It also wasn't. People who rent storage often own too much or nothing at all. This man owned very little, but moved it with the care of a person transporting belief. Boxes in, boxes out, sometimes a crate that whined in my ears like it had nails inside. One night, he loaded a single box and drove not towards home, but towards the lake. We followed. He parked near a shuttered bathhouse where the wind took your breath and didn't give it back. He carried the box to a set of stairs that disappeared into lake water, and I felt something I'd felt only once before, carrying my son through a dark house during a power outage. The sense that something large was about to touch me without wanting to. We got out of the car. The man didn't hurry. He set the box on the stone, opened it, and removed a stack of envelopes. He placed each one on the stair, weighed down with a small stone. Then he walked away. Myra looked at me. I looked at the lake. I listened for sirens and for the thing behind sirens. Then I walked to the stair and picked up the top envelope. Inside was a pamphlet. No return address. just a title. The Current of Nine. The words were familiar. The tone was older. There was a diagram, a circle within a city. Points marked not with names but with ideas. Market, precinct, church, rail yard, union hall, printing press. A note in the margin. Infiltrate the circulatory system and the body moves itself. Christ, Myra said. It's an infection. It's a recipe, I said. We didn't tell the precinct right away. That's a sin I'll own. We wanted to see one more thing first. The way you might put your hand near the stove after you've already burned yourself. Just to confirm heat still behaves the way you expect. We tailed the man to a meeting in a basement room with fluorescent lights that hummed like bees in a jar. When the door closed, we were left with the sound and our own guilty breath. I put my ear to the vent. I did it because I'm an idiot and because I'm a detective. The voice inside wasn't the man's. It was higher, thinner, a shape cut out of air. It said the word ascent in a way that made me think of people climbing a staircase that ended on the lip of a roof. It said necessary with hunger and veil with impatience. It said current and angle and host. The room answered like a choir that had learned the words phonetically. After that, we told the precinct. The room got raided. The faces looked like faces always do. Mailmen, a bus driver, a private security guard with tightening eyes, a clerk from the courthouse records office. The kind of people you already trust because you have to. We found nothing a jury would like. Everything that would make a person with an old detective's folder nod. Leaflets with the punctuation of a threat. Journals with ideas that curdled on the page. On a shelf, a box lined with red cloth that was cotton-dyed in a sink. Inside, a set of objects that meant nothing to anyone who didn't belong. City maps with circles drawn in grease pencil. A Polaroid of a streetlight taken at noon. A stack of matchbooks from bars that had closed long before. We booked them for what we could. The press called it a fringe, occult cell. The city exhaled a little. My wife asked me if I felt better. My son slept on my shoulder, while the weatherman promised a warm front. In the morning, the letter writer returned. You've closed another door. The house keeps building. We traced the typeface this time. We asked wide and quiet. The machine the letter came from sat in a back office at the precinct, the report-taking room with the glass that never got cleaned. The only people with keys were the desk sergeant, the captain, and the janitor who'd been there since the 60s. The sergeant didn't type. The captain dictated. The janitor shrugged like we'd asked him the weight of the moon. I started looking at my own rooms differently. There's a paranoia that's just math done out loud. Who has keys? Who knows doors? Who smiles too long when asked simple things? The twist didn't come with a scene. It came like the city's song. Steady, low, inevitable. A call from the courthouse. A request to testify at a parole hearing I didn't believe could be real. A man from the first case, the one whose eyes had floated to the ceiling like they were afraid of seeing what his mouth was saying, had a lawyer who knew something I didn't, that our house had stairs we hadn't counted. The lawyer's name was Gentle, and his suit was good. He smiled with his teeth covered. He asked me questions that were not questions, statements in a polite tone. Detective, would you say you found a network rather than a group? Would you say the beliefs in question are protected until acted upon? Would you say your investigation may have influenced those beliefs simply by naming them? I wanted to say we'd only ever chased harm, not ideas. He wanted me to understand that harm had learned to change its clothes. After the hearing, in the hallway that always smells like old paper and new sweat, the lawyer handed me an envelope with my name typed on it. I didn't open it until I was in my car. Inside, a photograph taken from a height, me, watching the storage unit with Myra at my side, the back of my head like a mugshot, a note in that same wrong type. Turn around. I did, because I'm an idiot, and because I'm a detective. The man who'd rented the P.O. box was sitting on the courthouse steps, reading a newspaper printed 3 years ago. He wore a coat 2 sizes too large, like a man who'd borrowed himself. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He stood, folded his paper, and walked into the building. I followed. I always follow. The corridor he took was one I'd been down 100 times. This time, it had a door I'd never seen. It was the color of a bruise and unmarked. He went through it. I made it only as far as the handle, before the hallway filled with people who wanted to be elsewhere, and a bailiff who wanted me to be a person I wasn't, someone with permission. By the time the way cleared, the door didn't exist. A portion of the wall was freshly painted, the kind of fresh you can smell even when the sign says dry. I stood there with my hand open, like I'd been promised something, and someone was slow to hand it over. Then I went home. I carried my son. I watched my wife watch the news, say nothing about anything that mattered. I slept like a man who's waiting to be woken. The twist isn't that they were everywhere. You knew that the first time we said current. The twist is what I learned when I finally knocked on the only door that made sense. The door to the man with the folder he'd given to both of us. The old detective with a face like a closed case file. Abrams. His apartment smelled like dust, doing its best not to be dust. He motioned for me to sit without looking up. His desk was covered in paper that didn't know it was dead yet. He said, "You shouldn't have followed the lawyer. That was for you to ignore." Then he turned and looked at me the way a person looks at a mirror when he's about to practice something honest. "I tried to stop it," he said, "and then I tried to write it. That's the confession. If you stare long enough into any pattern, it starts to offer you a place inside it. You think that place will let you break it from within. You tell yourself that lie, because it's shaped like a strategy. But the pattern has no inside. It's all edge." He slid a photograph across the desk. A room lit like a garage. A handful of men and one boy at a table. A box lined with red cloth that was cotton, dyed in a sink. I recognized 3 faces. The 4th was young enough to be mistaken for a nephew. The 5th made my stomach do the thing that makes you press your hand against your own body, like you're trying to steady the ship you live in. It was me. "What is this?" I said. Because sometimes you have to let your mouth ask the stupid version of the question, so your brain can do the hard version quietly. "A practice meeting," Abrams said. "We held them to learn their language, to imitate it, to see who would come. When we spoke it, we," I said. He smiled like a wound. "You came once. You were working a double. You don't even remember it. You came because you wanted to know what we were holding. You came because, like me, you believe the only way to disarm a trap is to put your own hand inside it." "I would remember," I said, and my voice sounded like a man imitating mine. He shook his head. "You remember what you can survive." The photograph had a date stamped crooked in the corner that made my chest go cold. A week before the first arrest. Time enough to learn a language. Time enough for a language to learn you. "Listen," he said, leaning forward. "The city's song. What you've been hearing, it changes you. It makes you hum along without noticing. That's how currents work. That's how belief works. You didn't join anything. You brushed against it. It brushed back. Now you see it everywhere because it sees you. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to thank him. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered anymore. What do I do? He laughed, a small sound like a cough. You do what you've been doing. You close doors. You understand the house keeps building. You teach your kid how to listen for the wrong note without letting it be the only thing he hears. And the letters? I asked. He shrugged. Maybe they were warnings. Maybe invitations. Maybe from someone on your side trying to scare you into staying alert. Maybe from someone who wanted you to walk through the bruise-colored door and not come back. I stood. I took the photograph, not because I wanted it, but because I needed something to keep my hand busy that wasn't a fist. I left his apartment and walked into a city that had decided to rain just hard enough to make the streetlights look like prayers melting. Back at home, my wife had put my son to bed. She asked me if I was hungry. I said no. She asked me if I was okay. I said yes. Both of us understood we were lying a little for the sake of something larger. I went to the freezer and moved the bag of peas. The letters were curled from cold. I took them out and read them again, as if they would have changed. You've closed one door. The house has many. You've closed another door. The house keeps building. I put them back. I slept the way a city sleeps, pretending the song is the wind and not a warning. In the weeks that followed, we closed more doors. We found a storefront with a room that looked like a church if you squinted, and a court if you didn't. We shut down a P.O. box that kept refilling no matter whose name was on the lease. We told the city, out loud and in paper, that the men who called themselves a crew had not been a myth, but a pack, and that we had put them away. We were careful with our words. We were not careful enough. On the first day of spring, an envelope arrived in my locker at the precinct. Same type, same wrong closeness of letters. Inside, a Polaroid of a door painted the color of a bruise. The back, a single line. Houses don't stop at walls. They keep growing in the dark. I realized then what the boy had meant when he said, because it worked. He hadn't meant the crimes. He hadn't meant the rituals. He meant the idea of power moving under everything, of a current that carries men who would otherwise drown. We'd taken away their boat. We'd drained their pool. But the river, the one made of need and want, and the sick belief that hurting makes you holy, that river kept finding new banks. That's the twist I promised you. Not that I was them, but that they were me, because they were the city, and I am made of it. The difference is in the listening. They hear the song and dance to it. I hear it and mark the beat on a map. They call it a scent. I call it a job. They call it a current. I call it a case that never ends. When my son asked me why I work at night, I told him the truth a child can hold. That's when people need me. When he's older, I'll tell him the rest. That there are houses built in the dark that only look like rooms when you turn the lights on. That there are doors that appear when you're tired and disappear when you're awake. That sometimes the door has your name on it and the ink is still drying. Until then, I'll keep a photograph in my wallet I don't look at often. The one of a room lit like a garage, a table, a box with red cloth dyed in a sink, a handful of men, and a version of me who came to learn a language without letting it teach him how to pray. It reminds me that the first rule of the city is simple. You cannot beat the house, but you can keep it from adding your room to its floor plan. I walk the alleys that sing under their breath. I listen for the wrong note. I close what I can, and when I can't, I write it down in a notebook, because sometimes the only door you can shut is the one that keeps a story from becoming a ritual. Sometimes the difference between a city and a current is a name spoken out loud in a courtroom, or a letter put back in the freezer so it doesn't warm its way into your hands. If you're looking for a moral, you won't like the one I have. Evil is patient. It knows carpentry. It will build rooms where you thought there was only wall. It will paint the door the color of a bruise, so you'll tell yourself nothing's there. Your job, my job, isn't to knock it down. It's to learn the hallways well enough to lead people back out when they wander. And if you're listening close enough right now, you can hear it. The city's song, the part under the buses and trains, the humming of a house growing in the dark, testing each wall for weakness. That sound used to scare me. Now it keeps time, because as long as I hear it, I know I'm still out here, walking, counting steps, waiting for the door only I can see to show itself again. When it does, I won't be surprised. The envelope is already in my freezer. The peas are getting frostburn. The house is building. So am I.